Hi guys, in the previous video we added EPGs on APIC ACI using Python and the REST module or library, so to speak. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to configure a pre-registration for your leaf nodes or spine nodes that you're going to be adding to your APIC. So in this case, we do not have an infrastructure that we are going to be plugging anything in, but you can see the same effect of it on the DevNet lab environment by just precasting the nodes, and if they were to be plugged in with a specific serial, it would be registered and it would take that role with that specific name in the specific pod. And that gets automatically picked up by the APIC eventually when it gets plugged in. So let's take it away. Okay, so first that we want to do is we want to create a new file. So let's go here and create a pre-register node. Okay, so the main thing that we need is we're going to need the request library. Let's say import requests. And then we will still need JSON, so import JSON. And to disable non-SSL certificates, we're going to import again the URL lib 3. Okay. Now, in one of my previous videos, I showed you how to create the authentication token with Python, so that you can log in and actually cast REST calls to the APIC. So I'm just going to import that module, and there, if you want, just look at the second video in the series, and it'll show you how to do that. So from ACI login import, I think let's just import the module directly. Login. Okay, then we need a function. And for now, we're just going to pass. We're not going to create it right now. If name equals main, create the main starting point of the file, and we'll pass that for now. Okay, save. Now I have prepared some data there, but I will give you brand new data to work with so that you understand the process that needs to happen when we go through this. So let's just log out here so that you see. Again, the shared APIC environment is not the fastest environment, but it does do what we need to do in order to practice. If you don't know the username and password, you can go on to the Cisco developer.cisco.com. You can go to data center and go scroll down to the ACI simulator always on specific one. Click on that, and it will take you to this page, which would give you the admin and the username and password and the URL that you're going to be using. So I've already got that here saved into my cache. Okay, so you want to go to Fabric, then check Fabric membership, and here you'll see the 3 switches that is currently configured on this APIC environment or ACI environment, and it's a spine and 2 leaves. Now, what we want to be doing is we want to go to nodes pending registration. So here I've created a test one prior, so I'll show you how this is done. The idea is that when you cast your switch first, is that you will pre-register your node here. Then once you pre-registered it, it will show up in nodes pending registration. Then the APIC will go through a lookup eventually to see what switches is connected to it, and if it is ACI switches and so forth. Then it's going to go through a serial lookup. If your serial is already configured, like what we are going to do, with a name and pod ID and node ID and so forth, it will then move to a registered node state, which would be over here. If you just plug it in and you have not pre-registered the device, what would end up happening is it would show up here as in nodes pending registration, and you would have to go and right-click on the entry. And if it is a device that it can already see, you'll have the option here to register that serial and then precast it, or then configure it, and then it's going to go through another cycle again to move it from the pending registration page to the registered nodes page. So for now, let's open up, not that one, let's open up the API inspector. Let's move that off to the side. Don't scroll, and now we're going to say create fabric node member. The node member is, now in this specific environment, there is only one pod because it's a very small simulation, but a lot of companies have multiple pods, and if you're only going to intend to ever have one pod, then it's fine to leave this as normal. But if you leave this as normal, you don't get the full call when trying to capture it. So to get a more realistic example, I would go and set this to pod 2, and I create a serial here called, and I call that as a serial, and I say node ID is 211, as in this the 11th switch in pod 2, and it's going to, I'm just going to call it fake dash leaf dash 211, and I specifically state that it's unspecified. The software version that runs on and the model number that comes from the switch will define whether it's a spine or switch. You do not have to specify the spine or switch, and this works. I've tested it in a real world environment. So just before I actually go and commit that change, I'm going to clear so that we get a fresh inspector. And now I want to take this post, copy that, okay, paste. Now the main thing is I need the payload. Then we're going to go to best JSON viewer. This is probably one of my favorite JSON viewers. Just you paste it over there, you beautify, and there goes everything. Now, if you did not change the pod ID, this entry doesn't show up at all. It automatically goes. So if you don't put that entry in, that key value, it automatically goes to pod 1, as pod 1 will always be the first pod that you get on a ACI implementation. Okay, so now we are going to start adding all of this information into our script. So for the time being, I will put this in an uncommented section so we just have something to work with and refer back to. Okay, so one of the first things I want to do is I want to disable those URL warnings. for the SSL certificate, URL exceptions, insecure request warning. Yeah, that's fine. Then I want to give my function a few variables. So the first variable is APIC. Then we've got a login user, a password. Then the variables that we will be getting specifically for the leaf, which is serial. Node name. Actually, let's just keep everything in capitals. It's just for training sake so that you can see it easier in the code. Once you get used to it, then you can go to the normal convention. Name, node ID, and then the specific pod that you're going to be using, pod ID. Okay, that auto-completed for me. Okay, now we can create our cookie because we need to be able to log in. So cookie is equal to login username, APIC, and password. Now just to verify, we can just print our cookie to make sure we are getting it. Base URL is equal to APIC. Now I know you can use fstring. Fstring I think came in 3.7 or 3.8 Python, but I'm going to be using the dot format just so that this version will work on older versions of Python as well. Okay, then we've got a /API /dot format APIC equals APIC. Okay. Now the URL that we want to be using is over here. And we're going to do a URL underscore prepend. It's already giving me some information that's going to make my life a little bit easier. But the main part is here. I want to from node all the way through to the end. So let's do that. And we dot format this. Now, as you can see here, the information that was put in was something I already precasted earlier. But that is specifically the serial number. So we are going to specifically say serial equals serial and make this into the serial variable. Okay, then we are going to concatenate the two strings to create one new URL. So URL is equal to base URL plus URL prepend. Then we got headers. Headers is equal to, I think it is capital C. Content dash type is equal application JSON and connection keep alive. Okay, so our headers are set. Now we're going to create a pre-payload, and I will get to that in a moment. Once we've finished our pre-payload, we will have an actual payload, which is JSON dumps for the pre-payload. Then we can print our data response. We can try and sort it. Okay, before we actually sort that, let's just go and create the response. So response is equal to requests.request. Okay, that's fine. Now we're going to do a post because we are creating an object. The cookie is equal to cookie. I think we created, yeah, just normal cookie. Then data is equal to payload. Headers is equal to headers. And verify is equal to false. That I think is the whole request. Now after this we can do a print response dot status code underscore code. This is to verify that when we make the call and we get a 200 OK, that it works. If we get anything other than a 200, like a 400 or something, then there's something wrong and we need to go fix it. Okay. Then we can return the JSON response is equal. JSON underscore response is equal to JSON loads response.text. Yes. Okay, so then return. And now you can do this in less lines. I'm just trying to break up the steps a little bit. Return JSON underscore response. Okay. Now we're going to set our variables. So generally I just usually copy this to start. Makes it easier to start. So our APIC is definitely going to still come into play. Then, okay, so it's already auto done that for me. Then username is going to be admin. Password is going to be Cisco PSDT. Now serial is, I'll just give it something new. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's call it my Python leaf dash 220. This has to be a string, obviously. All of these things are actually strings. Okay, so we just said it's going to be 220 in the name, and then pod ID is equal to 2. Okay. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now we just need to sort out the payload. Now the payload, if you remember correctly, is from here. So we copy that we stripped. Paste it in there. Okay, so we need to do a dot format on all these kind of links or lines. Dot format. So just to speed things up a bit. Okay, considering we're creating generally new objects and we're not editing them, I'm going to leave this as created and not created, modified. So this is one of the variables. This is a variable. That's a variable. That's a variable. This whole line is a variable, and this section only is a variable. So let's just copy that section because the serial section is literally the same. Then this is pod ID. So let's go to pod ID. Pod ID equals pod ID. Node ID is this one. I think I made the screen bigger. Okay, then we need to do this one, which is name. Copy. And we put this into the section here. Okay, save. Okay, so we've got our variables. We've got, looks like everything in our call. This is not correct. Copy. Login user. Okay, now the main thing is we need to go and call our registration. So let's copy that section. APIC, login name, password, serial, node name, node ID, and pod ID. That's looking fine. If you want to, we can just do that to make it a little bit easier readable for what's inside the call. Now we can test it and verify. So let's go to our APIC sandbox. Okay, so we're looking for nodes pending registration, and we are expecting to see this is the one we created. We're expecting to see a C or lots of C's as the serial number. I can remove, is it that one or this one? They're not ready for deletion. So if I remove from controller, it's just going to take a good couple of minutes for the APIC to decom this entry, which is fine. I can do that. It's just going to take some time. Remove from controller. Okay, so let's test this by bringing the codes section output up and run code. Okay, let's first see what our problem is. No module named ACI login. No, it's not ACI login. It is only login. So let's go fix that. So this file, I'm actually calling that file. So That should be fine. Just login.py, and just to verify again, we can go into the EPG is the last one we did. That's similar to the EPG. Okay, let's run it again. Did I print correctly? Code says it completed. There's a quick way to verify. Refresh. I'm not sure I executed the right one. Let's see. Clear output. Okay. Okay, something seems to be missing. Let me just quickly look at it line by line. Let's just, to be safe, let's just call this URL. This is going to be user pass WD serial node name node ID pod ID node name node ID pod ID. And just to verify, this has to be in the same order. URL, username, password, serial, name, node, and pod. Serial, name, node, and pod. Okay. Now, starting. Completed. Save. And then let's take this out. Then once we're inside, we can say print inside started, print cookie. Then we'll be printing our status code, and then we return. Okay, let's see. Save and run. Wondering if it's actually got something to do with it. Okay, let's just go to the file manually. So it's not giving me any errors. Okay, I must have just made a spelling mistake because I rewrote it and it seems to be going through fine. I need to now, just for argument's sake, need to change some attributes because I already casted one. Let's just go to the next one, D. Okay, so there is the code again. Let's just go through it line by line. So we're importing the multiple libraries. We're importing the login from login, the URL disable warnings. Then we've created our function, APIC, username, password, serial, node name, node ID, and pod ID. Then we doing the cookie. We getting the base URL. We prepending the extension to the URL with formatting the serial. We setting our content type, application JSON, connection keep alive. Then we setting up our payload or pre-payload, where we are editing our payload with our attributes, serial, pod ID, serial, node ID, node name, and then serial again. We then create a normal payload by dumping the pre-payload using JSON dumps. Then we can print that, pre-print that. I'm just going to take that out. That is not necessary. Then we're creating our actual request under the variable called response with a post, URL, cookies, payloads, headers, and verifying SSL to be false. We're printing the response code and we're returning the JSON response. Then we go into our main starting point. This is the URL to the URL, username, admin, password, serial, node name, node ID, and pod ID. Okay, so clear this and we can run it again. So the delay here could possibly be because of the server. Okay, so there we're getting our cookie that we wanted and the 200 response code. We now can go back onto the Fabric membership and just verify that the D delta 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 serial node is in the unregistered or the node pending registration section. Okay, so node pending registration, and we see there's the previous one I tried, and here's the last one. So it will currently, it's now in a checking phase, and eventually it will go to an undiscovered stage. And if I had to go and plug in a switch with a serial ID of this specific serial number, then it will automatically register. Now, in this case, I did not specify a leaf. So the node type will be unknown. But once it actually speaks to that switch, it will automatically say, okay, but I know that you are a leaf switch. So I will configure you as a leaf switch going forward and put you into the registered nodes. Fabric membership. So then it will pop up here. Okay, that is pretty much it for this video. The next video, what we're going to be doing is It's not specific to ACI, but it is very helpful in terms of casting multiple objects to the same time. And it's got to do with using your Excel spreadsheets in order to create these objects onto APIC. If you've got any suggestions, leave them leave them in the comments. Otherwise, like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Thanks, guys.